Hello, my name is Simon Motture. I am a Nutanix Senior Systems Engineer working today from a home office down in beautiful Southern Maryland. And today I'd like to provide a demonstration of one of our products that we call Nutanix Era that has a variety of features and functionality specifically around databases. So today's focus will be doing a demonstration of how Nutanix Era deploys Microsoft SQL Server. But before I begin the demonstration, I'd like to provide at least one, if not two slides, so you get a better appreciation for what we can do. So Nutanix Era, again, has many features, one of which is provisioning databases. Also provides copy data management, as well as a time machine. What we're actually doing is continuous snapshots of the databases with the ability to restore the database back to or clone the database either one, to a specific point in time down to the granularity of a second. That's our time machine within Nutanix Era. So not only can provision, we can do copy data management, we can do quick cloning and refreshing a database. We can also update the database by providing updates and patches to the database. So there's a lot of capabilities inside Nutanix Era. This particular recording and demonstration will be focusing on one aspect, which will be the provisioning aspect of Microsoft SQL. And in the future, I'll provide additional demo recordings of all, if not all, it will be several of these features and functionalities of Nutanix Era. So before I actually jump into the demo environment, I want to make the case that without Nutanix Era, that the traditional approach of deploying databases can be complex, cumbersome, and involve a lot of people. So typically a DBA may request that he or she wants to build a new database, and that process might begin by asking the virtualization team to build out either a virtual machine or a set of virtual machines that the database will ultimately be installed on. And that virtual admin has to configure that virtual machine, apply the resources as far as CPU, memory, may have to hand that off to a storage admin as far as how much storage might be required and creating the disks and the disk layout for the database that's going to be connected to the virtual machine. Perhaps even building a cluster for clustered resources for either maybe SQL, Oracle, etc. And then finally provision the database before the DBA actually gets access to their database. So that process, while manual in its approach, is very cumbersome. It involves a lot of different people, maybe different teams, and can typically take a long time, days if not weeks. So today what I'd like to do is provide a demo of Nutanix Era, specifically deploying Microsoft SQL Server database, and future recordings, again, will cover a variety of other topics. So let's jump right in. So before I get into Era, I'm going to briefly show you what we're deploying to. So we have a Nutanix cluster. I've logged into Prism Central here, which is our manager of managers that manages multiple clusters, Nutanix clusters. Today in my environment, I have one Nutanix cluster. And what I'd like to show you is a little bit about the environment that's on this particular cluster. First, we can see that the hypervisor is AHV, or Acropolis Hypervisor, which is the built-in hypervisor that comes with Nutanix clusters and Nutanix software at no additional charge. Now, we certainly support all major hypervisors on the market, such as VMware vSphere, Microsoft Hyper-V, but for those customers that can take advantage of AHV, keep in mind that it comes with our technology at no additional cost to help our customers with their TCO, their total cost of ownership. So here on the main screen, I can see the health and the welfare of the cluster. If I drill down into the hardware view and I look at this diagram, I can see a depiction of a 2U chassis, or you might think of it as an appliance. Inside this appliance, I've got 4 compute nodes, compute node 1, 2, 3, and 4. As I click on these, each one of them have different information about them as far as their health, their behavior, utilization. Each one of these compute nodes has a variety of disk drives that are attached. We support both spinning disk as well as SSD, solid state drives for high performance. This particular cluster happens to be an all flash, meaning all of the drives are all SSD. So we give our customers a lot of choice and flexibility. We can support as many nodes as is necessary in the cluster. This is a lab environment of mine where I currently have one 2U chassis with 4 nodes and it's all flash. Now, speaking of the storage, what we do is we take all those disks and we combine them together into one large storage pool. In this example, the raw storage that's available to the cluster is about 15.61 terabytes of data. And if I look at the storage container, I can see that the usable storage is roughly about half of that, or 7.59 TB of usable storage available to the virtual machines. So speaking of virtual machines, I've got a variety of VMs that I've pre-deployed in this environment. I've got a Microsoft SQL Server 2016 database that I've deployed, and you'll see that I'm using an Era sort of as a template from which I'll build other databases. This one's currently off because it's going to be used for that purpose. And then I've actually pre-deployed another database that I'm calling Microsoft SQL Server 2 that I've actually deployed through Era already. So we're going to show you how to deploy a database server and then to deploy databases. Now, Era actually runs as a virtual machine on a Nutanix cluster. And as you can see here, I've got this IP address, which is ends in 82. So if I simply bring up a browser to 82 on port 8443, I'm presented with the dashboard screen of Nutanix Era. So from here, what we can do is actually start to build out our database environment. As you can see on this dashboard screen, I already have a database that's running. It's called Fiesta. We're going to build another database today. We're going to build a new database server. So one of the things I might want to do is go to the database area here. And as you can see, we support a variety of databases from Oracle to Microsoft SQL to MySQL, Postgres, Mariah, et cetera, et cetera. So today I'm going to be focusing on Microsoft SQL Server, and I'm going to provision a new one. And we can do cluster databases, but for today's demo, I'm just simply going to choose a single database. And again, I'm going to focus on SQL Server for today's demo. Now, I'm going to name this database server, and again, I've already got an MSSQL 2, so I'm going to make this one something else, like MSSQL 4. And then I'm going to choose a software profile. It's called Microsoft SQL 2016. And I'm going to leave this screen here, and I'm going to jump to another screen that's also logged into Era so that I can show you what these profiles are. So if I jump into this dashboard, and I start to take a look at the profiles here on software, you can see that this profile here, it's called Microsoft SQL 2016, has information in it about who's the owner, is it published, etc. And you can see that if I go in, what I can do is I can create, if I want a new profile, based on a running virtual machine. So the running one today is Microsoft SQL 2. I could certainly build a new profile based on that. And then if I wanted to, I could power that one off and to use it sort of as a template. So that's what I've done previously with that Microsoft SQL 2016 database. I used it as a template, saved it as a profile, and then after I was completed with that, I powered off that virtual machine so it can be used sort of as a template, if you will. The next thing to show you is compute profiles. So remember how complex it might be to ask a virtual admin to provision virtual machines and specify how much CPU memory and storage might be needed. So again, the DBA can come into Era and choose one of these existing profiles. So again, if I come over to the profiles within Era and I look at the compute side, we can see that we have some that are predefined, or I can say create. And so as you can see here, we can assign virtual CPUs and virtual cores and virtual memory. So this is the, if you will, the compute side of the profile. And I can create as many of these profiles as I might need for DBAs to be able to use. Now, again, this is a role-based administration product, so you can have different DBAs logging in with different rights to do different things. And again, networking. So we don't want a DBA to have to worry about contacting the network team. With DBA to be able to deploy virtual machines, create database servers, assign resources, and assign database servers to different VLANs as might be required. So again, if I go back and I start to take a look at some of the profiles in here, you can see I've got a variety of them for the network side. The one that I've predefined for network says that my VLAN 0, I've pre-named it. I've given a name to my VLAN 0, and I've simply called it VMs. So you can come in here and say, you know, I want to, for all my SQL databases, I'm going to give it a name, call it XYZ, and I'm going to choose the VLAN. Now, I've in the cluster labeled my VLAN 0 as simply the name VMs. And again, in the cluster, you can have as many VLANs as you want and name them anything that you want. So there's no limitation on number of VLANs supported with Nutanix. I personally, in my lab so far, simply only created one for this lab environment. So SQL is going to get loaded on my VLAN 0. Now that I've done that, if I want to, I can join an Active Directory domain, and I would use the domain profile again. In this case, I'm not going to join this server to a domain. I'm just going to do a single instance. And I'm going to type in a password. And a typical default password we like to use for demos is Nutanix/for_you. And that would be for that local server. And then, of course, I'm going to have a SQL Server instance. We're going to take that default for the collation, take the default. And then again, for the database parameters, I'm going to use this guy, which is a SQL Server default instance. So again, if I go and look at that, again, we've got some database parameters here for SQL Server. Here's our instance parameters. And again, you can look and see if I were to create a new one for SQL. As you can see here, we have things like what is maximum server memory, what's the minimum server memory, as well as are we going to enable contained databases, that kind of thing. So you have that capability for that profile that we're going to select here. We're going to do Windows authentication as opposed to mixed for now, and I'm going to choose next. Now, I want to give this database a name. I'm going to go ahead and choose Fiesta 4. I think maybe I'm going to just give it a lowercase Fiesta 4 there for whatever reason. And that looks like I need to specify this guy for the database parameters. And then I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now, over here we have SLAs within Era, and I'm going to choose the bronze SLA. And again, I'll tab over to this other screen so you can see it. But it has to do with snapshots and snapshot schedules and how frequently do we take and how frequently do we retain snapshots. So let me tab over to the other screen here. And if I go to the section within Era that talks about SLAs, you can see that we've got some out of the box that we've provided to you, such as the bronze SLA. Now, I can also create additional ones. As you can see here, if you recall, one of the things that we do with Era is this time machine where we're taking continuous snapshots so that we can roll back a database to any point in time down to the granularity of a second. So I'm taking these continuous snapshots and I'm retaining them for 30 days. So I want to be able to restore that database to any point in time to the past 30 days. Then I'm taking daily snapshots and I'm retaining them for 7 days, and I'm taking weekly snapshots and I'm retaining them for 2 days, etc. within this particular SLA. And I'm simply choosing to use this SLA as I'm a DBA, as I want to deploy databases. So I'm already setting up my snapshot schedule for this particular database and virtual machine. So now I just simply want to go ahead and click provision, and it's really that easy. Now, once we've said go ahead and provision, we can actually monitor the behavior. And this is pretty interesting because from a monitoring perspective, I can see the processing that's going on. I can see creating a database. I can see it registering the database when it executes various different scripts and provisions, not only when it creates the database server, but when it provisions the actual database in the database server, applying best practices to that database, such as even things like the disk layout that we might need for that database according to best practices, and applying additional post-installation scripts and registering that database. So we're only at about 10% right now, and we have a lot of things to go through. It's currently working on creating this database. So at this point in time, this is going to take probably about another 20 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is pause the recording, and we'll actually come back to this after it's completed successfully. And we'll take a look and see how it's doing. So as a status, now we can continue to observe the operational behavior of Nutanix Era deploying the database server in the database. And as you can see, we're about 65% utilized. We have actually registered the database server, provisioned it, given it an IP address, 192.168.1.95, and now we're working on provisioning the actual database. So we'll come back and check on the status a bit later. If I log back into the Nutanix cluster, one of the things that we can do is draw down from Prism Central into the actual cluster, look at the virtual machines that are being deployed throughout the environment. And we see that Microsoft SQL Server 4 with the 192.168.1.95 address is already there within the cluster. So at this point in time, we're at about 65% of our way. We have a little bit of time to go. So again, I'm going to pause this recording. We'll come back a little bit later after it does either gotten further along or completed the actual deployment. So as we can see here, the provisioning of the database server in the database has completed 100% without error. And we see the time that it took for each one of the various different sections inside the operational aspect of error. So very nice for any DBA who's deploying to monitor, understand when the pre-processing happens, when the database server is being built, IP address that's being assigned, when the database itself is being provisioned on that database server and the best practices are being applied, and when the database is actually being registered to the database, as well as the time machine for the snapshot. So it's very nice to be able to see that, how long it took, and all the different components. Now, if we go back to, and remember that this is 192.168.1.95 for the database server that I've just created. If we go back to our Nutanix cluster, we can see not only the virtual machine that's built here on 192.168.1.95, but if I actually go and look at the virtual disk layout here, you'll see that there's a variety of different disks according to best practices for various different things here. Now, as well as that, what I can do is actually use AHV to launch the console here and take a look at the virtual machine. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've already logged in, and a couple of things that we can do here is if we just simply bring up, let's see here, start, run, and I want to run the Disk Manager tool. So if I run the Disk Manager tool and I look at some of these volumes that are currently not labeled, if you take a look, for example, if I were to say change drive letter for the path, you can see that not only do we have, I'm going to go ahead and change. I'm going to go ahead and sort actually by the largest drive. There we go. So now if I go and say change drive letter and pass, you can see, for example, this one that's selected is the Fiesta database data 1 drive. And if I select the next one down, if I were to look at that, that's the data 2 drive, so on and so forth. I'm going to select this one. I have a feeling that's going to be data 4, and indeed it is. And as I continue to scroll down, you can see different drive sizes. These were all about 120 gig. This one's about 101 gig. And if I look at this one, this is actually where the database DB logs would reside from a best practices perspective. And then this 47 gig partition here would be where the actual database logs reside for the Fiesta database. And then, for example, the next one down is the temp DB 1. And then, of course, we have additional temp DB 2, so on and so forth down here. So we can see that according to best practices, the disk layout has been done for us on our behalf. And if I go into the Microsoft SQL Server Studio tool, we can see that not only has SQL been installed, I'll go ahead and just connect, and then we can see that our database here, if I click under databases, our Fiesta database has been created. So far so good. I'm going to go ahead and close this window, go back to the error screen, extend my window, and return back to the dashboard here and continue with the demonstration. So, okay, so now that we have our Fiesta 4 database deployed, one of the things I'd like to do is deploy a web server front end. And to do that, I'm going to use another one of our products that we call Calm. I've given some previous demonstrations of Calm. Today I won't go over that too much in detail, so refer back to my presentations on Calm if you'd like to see how that technology works. But I've jumped into the Prism Central console, and I'm going to launch from Prism Central the Calm technology, and specifically I'm going to go to one of the blueprints that I've previously created for the Fiesta database. This blueprint is simply the instructions on how to automatically deploy a virtual machine and a set of applications. In this case, it's going to be a Linux virtual machine running a web server. And so what I'm simply going to do is launch this blueprint. I'm going to give this a name of the application, and I'm going to call it Fiesta 4. I'm going to give the password our default Nutanix for you. Let's make sure that I typed that correctly. Database name is Fiesta 4. This is SQL. This is the name of my domain administrator. And the host address, if you recall, when I go back to the cluster for SQL 4, was 192.168.1.95. I'm going to go ahead and kick that off and say create. Now, again, this is not Era. This is not Nutanix Era. This is yet another product from Nutanix. And what we're doing is we're now in the process of provisioning through automation a web server front end. So again, this is going to take a few minutes. It's going to build yet another virtual machine, deploy it, install the web server, and then we'll be able to connect the web server to that backend database. So this is going to take a few minutes. I'll go ahead and put the recording on pause here until this has made some progress, and we'll come back to this section in just a second. Okay, so I've restarted the recording, and we can come and take a look at the status of deploying this web server. Now, it's not completed yet. It's still in the provisioning status, but as I scroll down through Calm, I can see the different components, such as building the virtual machine, fetching the image for the virtual machine, doing different tasks that it needs to do to create that VM and install the various different packages. So it's sort of, if you will, working on doing a software installation at this point. But since at this point, while it has already built the virtual machine, we can go over to the cluster and take a look. So this is actually the name of the virtual machine. It begins with this node React right here. And I've built it so that it has today's date, or 0406, April 6, and the timestamp on it. And so this is actually the IP address of the new virtual machine that it's currently creating for the Fiesta 4 application, or at least for the web server side of the Fiesta 4 application. So I'll go ahead and pause this recording again, and we'll come back once the installation of the web server has completed fully to success. So I'm back again, and I'm looking at Nutanix Calm through the Nutanix Prism Central console, and I can see that the application for the web server is currently running. So it's actually deployed to all the components for the web server. It's created successfully, and our web server is up and running. So Calm has the concept of a service here, and again, we can see that the IP address for the service is the IP address of that virtual machine. So I can actually copy that IP address, and if I bring up a new browser and I go to that address on port 5001, we can see that we now have our application and our database actually running for all the products that are in our store. So I can create new products, do whatever I need to do. So our application is running and it's connected to our backend database that we deployed through Nutanix Era. So as a recap, Nutanix Era automatically deployed a database server with a database that we call Fiesta 4. For our DBA, we used Calm to deploy the web front end. This has been automatically deployed according to best practices, and it's done with SLAs depending on what we want for the actual snapshot criteria, as well as the profiles for how we want the server to be created as far as resources, such as CPU and memory and so on and so forth. So Era is a fantastic technology, and there's many different components to Nutanix Era that we mentioned before, such as the time machine and the updating, which we'll cover on a different recording here in the future. Today, we just wanted to cover deploying or provisioning databases. So with that, again, my name is Simon Motture. I'm a senior systems engineer with Nutanix, and I want to thank you for your time to watch the deployment of Nutanix Era services, SQL Server, as well as deploying the web front end with Nutanix Calm. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you'll tune in for one of the next demonstrations on Nutanix Era.